Hi, and welcome back to part three of the 5 years with long COVID series that I've been doing with Nicola Holmes, where we address some of the biggest issues that people face with the condition. Words on the screen here, or here, because I don't know which side it's going to be yet. Before we dive in, I just want to mention that I've recently launched channel memberships for the princely sum of 99p. To celebrate, there's going to be a live Q&A for members only taking place on Monday at 5 p.m. UK time. So if you've got any questions for that ahead of time, chuck them into the comments on this. So let's dive straight in with the list of words in part three. And the first one on our list is self-esteem. So I'll throw this one to you straight away, Nicola. Tell me about how your 5 year journey with long COVID has impacted on your self-esteem, either now or along that path.
It was most sort of impacted and bruised when I was most struggling and suffering and feeling isolated and impacted. It just felt, my life felt smaller, more reduced to caregiving. I couldn't do as much of the creative vocational work that gave a lot of meaning to my sense of identity and purpose, as we've touched on. So I think that was probably the tougher impact. But over time, as I have had more recovery, more capacity, and with gratitude to be back to work, I think honestly, all in all, it feels pretty robust at this point. That said, as a coach and having worked with people with chronic illness, not just long COVID, but other conditions that have impacted, like in some ways, that feeling of ability to contribute, ability to have purpose. I think there can be a lot of frustration and some struggle with feeling like, how worthwhile is this life? How much can I contribute? So I've seen it from both sides also, and I have a lot of empathy, both for my past self, that window, and others for whom it's ongoing.
Yeah, I think it's certainly something that's I've been aware of struggling with too. And I think for me, it's very much tied in with identity and all of the things that were part of my identity before, which were the way I made my living. I was a film director, the way I spent the rest of my time. I was a runner, I was a footballer, I was a skier, all of these things that form who you are. When all of them are gone, well, who's left? And if you create, and if those things that you did were had a sense of value to you.
Yeah.
And you could get into a separate conversation about whether it's healthy to create
Mhm.
self-value on achievements. But if that's the way that you are, and I was certainly a little bit like that, when you suddenly remove your ability to achieve anything and you lose your own sense of self, I think self-esteem becomes deeply challenged. And also when we're talking about the depression and anxiety that often is associated with long COVID, well, directly as a result of the inflammation that's part of the condition, and also because of the impact on your life, and as well as your nervous system dysregulation, I think it's almost it can be very difficult to go through a long COVID journey without having your self-esteem take a battering at points along that.
I think so. And like we've talked about in the other videos, I think if we think of a journey over time, I think a period in which there have been a lot of disruptive losses without, almost in a way, new possibilities emerging, new, almost like things that allow us to have a sense of new identity or shifted purpose. There's often a period of loss, a period of disorienting, like liminality or in between. My hope for most of us, even regardless of how limited we feel, is that there's room for that new emergent phase. But I think that self-esteem often maybe especially bumped around, if you will, in those early stages.
And I think that sort of ties us into where we're going next. We've sort of put three words together: reorientation, uncertainty, acceptance. I mean, it's a fundamentally uncertain condition, right? Because you're not certain about how you're going to feel in 5 minutes' time, how you're going to feel in an hour, how you're going to feel tomorrow, whether the plans you've made for next week, you're going to be able to do them or not. And that's before you even get to the point of what's going wrong in my body. When am I going to get better? What's my baseline for taking supplements? If I take something new, how do I know if it's made a difference when everything is changing so much all the time? It's like you're it's like you're in some sort of tumbler, like the tumbler of your washing machine, and you're trying to work out which way's up. Fundamentally, that's a little bit what going through long COVID's like? And how do you reorient yourself when you're still in the washing machine? I guess that's the question. And I don't quite know the answer.
Yes, I love your metaphors, Jez. And I would say too, I wonder, especially knowing people who are watching, maybe like us, 5 years in, others, this may be earlier stage, fresher phase. And I don't know about you, but for me, I would say I was much more fixated and preoccupied with the uncertainty in the first couple of years, like, and so much anxiety around, will I get better? What's my recovery? I noticed that has softened a lot. So I think some of my reorientation and acceptance has been, it absolutely has shifted and kind of softened with time. And I still hold those questions, but to a lesser degree, based on both significant recovery, but not never back to baseline. But it's like I've relaxed around it more, whereas I felt kind of panicked and desperate to get back to my old familiar self, especially exercise and all that stuff. So I don't know about you, but do you relate? Like, was that a more heightened struggle with uncertainty? Do you feel like you've come to a higher tolerance?
I think so. And I think that comes largely as a result of the tension between the life you used to have and the life you now have is greater in those early days because, the time delta between those points is not very long. And so the dramatic drop in ability is very keenly felt. Once you've got used to being incapable of doing the things you used to do for a long period of time, I think there is going to be a natural sort of a degree of acceptance. And this is always a tricky thing with acceptance is how much do we want to accept it? And does acceptance of your current state mean that you are no longer, searching for improvement or wishing for recovery? And I don't think the two have to be mutually exclusive. I think we can be accepting of our current condition, our current level of health, whilst also still looking forwards and hoping that the future can be better, hoping, wishing, taking steps towards trying to make that happen, whilst dealing with the perpetual knockbacks that you get every time that you get some hope at the end of the tunnel and then you crash again afterwards. And we're going to come on to this one actually shortly about what that takes. That's just a little trailer for the resilience word that's coming up. But acceptance, I mean, I don't think that I'm not there. I haven't accepted this altogether, but I generally live my days with a greater degree of acceptance than I did 2 or 3 years ago.
And I don't think I have too much else to say except, like we have referenced before, this all takes time. I don't think like an experience of shock or really disruptive loss, like there's no quick magic bullet, there's no bypassing. Like I really do think part of it is adjustment over time.
Yeah, I completely agree. So moving on, surviving versus thriving. I think this is a tough one because I think there is a certain level of illness where it's just a non-question, right? You have to be well enough to even have a smidge of thrive in there. Up to that point, I think there's very little that you can do, and literally getting from one day to the next is without making your symptoms worse by overdoing it, and that is surviving. And for many, many, many people, that's going to be the case. And I guess the question is over time, if you improve, how do you if you're living in a world where you're perhaps 40% of your old capacity and 30% of that 30% of your 40, so 75% of what you've got is spent on just surviving, and you've got a little bit left. And how do you choose to spend that? And that's a really tough choice about do you rest because do you save that because you don't want to make things worse, or do you try and do things that make your life better in that with that little 10% and risk crashing? And I think that choice, that dilemma, I think is out there for everybody else who isn't in that first group who's just surviving. We're all doing some form of that dilemma where we're trying to work out what we can spend of the energy we've got left to live a healthy, nourishing life without overdoing it. And that's a horrible decision because you're perpetually having to say no to things that you really want to do that would be really good for you or really good for your family? And where do you draw the line? It's horrible.
Yeah, no, I like how you acknowledged in some ways the two different groups. And because I feel like I kind of inhabited both sides of that over the course of the 5 years, it's true. And when I think back, it was such a diminished quality of life. And I don't mean to be like heavy or depressing about it, but I really remember struggling and feeling like I'm not a person who typically has low mood, but I remember how low I felt at times and how tearful I felt in some days. And I just want to, again, just offer another boost of empathy for those who might relate. And I just remember, it sounds so simplistic or something, but I just remember being like, life is way less fun. Like it was really a notable shift in my own sense of quality of life. And then, but the thriving too, and it even connects with the uncertainty. Like I love that where we're living with that dilemma of choice amidst constraint. And, you know, even recently, I've been wanting to nurture my health and well-being. And, you know, I was like, okay, it's time to sort of increase my walking. But I'm noticing a little more symptom exacerbation and feeling that frustration. It feels confusing when it's like I'm trying to thrive. And even with the knowledge I have and trying to really listen and attune to my body, it's still tough and it still feels like there's tension within trying to experiment with thriving the best that we can. It just sort of feels like it's not straightforward.
And especially psychologically and emotionally, because try to thrive too much, you get slapped in the face and you get punished for it. So,
Yeah.
how do you deal psychologically with the fact that you're being punished for just trying to do something good, right? That's that's where it requires, and actually that segues us into the next one, resilience and fortitude, because I think personally that the long COVID challenge will test your levels of resilience in ways that I don't think many other, well, I can speak for myself. I can't think of any other experiences in my life that have tested my resilience in the depth and breadth of ways that the long COVID experience has done. And you name the kind of ways in which you can be tested, long COVID will do that because your ability, your emotional resilience, like how many times can you deal with being slapped in the face, right? When you're just trying to do the basic things, or when you're just trying to be a good person sometimes, you know, and do something for somebody else. Bang, bang. How dare you think you had the energy to do that? You know, the resilience of going through 162 lights at the end of the tunnel that then get extinguished, right? Because we've all had that. We've all had that. Yes, I've turned the corner. I'm getting no, bang, no, you're not. And it's crushing. It's crushing. And so many different levels upon which that resilience is tested. And I don't know what the difference is between failing those tests of resilience and passing those tests of resilience. Because even if you pass one, you're just going to get another one just down the road anyway. So I can't really speak to that. And I don't know whether you can sort of objectively quantify success in those resilience tests, other than the more resilient you are, it gives you a better chance of managing the really boring shit that is creating a world that doesn't make your symptoms worse and all the rest of that. And that's really hard. It's really hard. And when I say creating that world, I mean, you know, all of the choices that come around pacing. That's a huge part of it. All of the choices that come around what medication you choose to take or not. You know, are you POTS or dysautonomic? Do you choose to take ibabradine or something like that? And what are the consequences of that? All of this, and then you have to tolerate the side effects of that thing you've done. Right? It's just every single path you take is fraught with difficulty, and what that does to your body and to your mind when you're perpetually under attack like that. It's really hard to push through. So I don't have any wisdom on this really, other than for everybody else who's struggling with it to say I get it. I guess that's all I can say really on that.
And I don't have much more to add, Jess. Like I'm resonating with what you're sharing. What pops to mind, which isn't, I never want to feel like I'm imposing anything, but just to share from my experience. I would say in terms of like fortitude and resilience, I will say I think my mental health and a kind of well-being and mental fortitude, emotional resilience, I think for me that there was a shift when I, in a way, stopped giving so much of my focus actually to my symptoms. Like I tracked really in a detailed way. And again, I think that was part of me trying to feel agency and orient and trying to understand if I do this, what happens. But there was a notable shift for me in essence to stop giving so much of my precious life force to sort of circling back on myself and focusing. And so I would say that if people feel like they want to run an experiment, if they relate to that, for me, it was liberating. And I think it made me feel like even if there wasn't too much difference in how I was living my life, but it felt like I felt more free and more of the joy, honestly. Like it was almost like my attention was more available to the fullness of life. Even little things, just like noticing the beauty in the garden versus, oh, I better check the latest symptom and get the pulsometer on again. Like I think I was a little bit obsessive. So if some people relate to that, I would encourage experiments with shifting your focus. Not, and I'm not judging, and if that serves people, great. But I think that helped me.
Well, and I think that leads us on to bravery, which is the next word, because I think every change that you try to make in this condition requires bravery because your one's comfort zone is whatever comfort zone you had in life before that was managed via various different coping mechanisms, whatever they might have been, just to manage the world around us and the stress of daily living and work and family and everything else. That comfort zone has just gone to the point where it might be like this big, right? Where you know that you can do this and that's okay. And anytime that you try to make any change to anything that you do in the hope that it's going to make things better requires bravery. And this condition will test that bravery in 1,000 different ways for you to risk making your symptoms worse by trying this medication, by trying this supplement, by trying this activity, by trying this breathing exercise, by trying this meditation, by speaking to your parents on the phone for half an hour, right? Even that requires bravery because there might be an inbuilt degree of stress in that phone call. And actually, you know what, before that would have been fine. But now even the simple things take bravery. And I think that is really, really hard. And again, ties back into that sort of resilience side of things too.
And I would say just honor both sides of the coin. It takes bravery to keep daring to hope, to keep running new experiments, and it can feel brave to surrender, to take a break on trying, to let what you have be enough in this moment, to see what life you can cultivate and take a break on efforts and tries. So I want to honor the bravery in both of those.
Yeah, I agree. Um, okay, so we had some comments on because we spoke a little bit about the impact of long COVID on relationships in the last film, and there was some requests talking about sort of wanting a little bit more about people talking about how difficult it is being single with long COVID. And I think, you know, in the world before long COVID, when we were well, I said not excluding the people who weren't before, but in principle, there was always a bit of a sense of the grass is greener, or it felt like that as a young adult. Of if you're single, the grass is greener being in a relationship. If you're in a relationship, the grass is greener being single. And I think that grass is greener thing probably seems even more the case in long COVID because whatever scenario you're in is made far more difficult by the condition. If you're single, I mean, I don't know how you would go out trying to date and meet people if you're trying to manage your infection exposure. If you have to be in bed by 7 p.m., if you can't drink any alcohol, if you can't leave the house, if you can't deal with a conversation for more than half an hour. How you know what I mean? Even just the physical, I mean, dating's bad enough, right? But how do you meet someone in that environment? And then, you know, and for those people who are in relationships, as we've spoken about in the previous films, they can be incredibly difficult. Because it's very difficult to understand the condition unless you've experienced it. And that puts huge pressures on too. So I think on this point, I just wanted to nod to that grass is greener phenomenon and also just to put a shout out for the people who are single and finding it very, very lonely. Because even the ability to manage those relationships with friends and stuff is also compromised too. And your ability to meet new people is hugely compromised. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to nod to that really.
And I think so I'm partnered and have been, in a long-term partnership at this point. But I'll be a little bit vulnerable and honest to say, I think I had to confront some of my own internalized ableism because there's always like, I'm in a committed partnership, but it's not a marriage. We haven't decided for life. And even though I'm in it and committed, it was a sense of like a shift in identity. Like, I think there's a certain the ableism being like, oh, if I wanted to ever put myself out there or life, God forbid something happens and I'm single again. I think there's that sort of ableism and that it would always feel like, oh, I'm sure it'd always be a good catch in the pool. But suddenly it felt like I just had to confront feelings of like, oh, but if I have less energy, less capacity, like if I have some levels of dependence or illness impacts my ability to earn as much as I wish, I had to confront feelings of like, I felt a vulnerability that's a little bit, maybe hard to say, or even to be like, if this affects my identity as a sexual being and like my energy and how this affects my body, it has changed. I feel different than the version of me that existed before. Um, and for now, I'm good and I'm in this partnership and I'm grateful, and we're working with each of us as we are. But does that like, did you have any of that where it feels like a different sense of,
I think fundamentally, when your identity is changed, suddenly your identity as the person you are as in relation to everyone else has also changed, right? Because the version of you that you could be before and the way that that affected the way you were around other people suddenly is no longer possible. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I hadn't actually considered it in that sense, but you're absolutely right.
like almost, I guess, like a little bit of an unfair conflation, like, wouldn't people rather date someone who's healthy and can just have unlimited adventures? And oh, does that change my value a little bit? And maybe again, that's still conveying an ableist assumption, but I mean, I do think it's pretty dominant in the dominant culture. So to sort of, yeah. So anyway, I can't know what it would be like to have been navigating this as a single person, but I love that we're just trying to share and just name empathy for all of us as this has impacted that aspect of our lives.
And one of the other things that came up in the comments was about the impact on sex as well. And I think I did a study where I looked at this and I asked some questions about this. And I'll link to that video in the description. But for those people who haven't seen it, I think it's also just worth acknowledging that physically we're not the same. We're not as able as we used to be. Sex, but even in itself, is not an activity that is compatible with dysautonomia or an energy crisis, let alone someone who's feeling terrible, who has a headache or self-esteem or identity issues or any of this stuff, right? It impacts it in so many ways. And the study showed this really clearly from just, from both male and female sides, and the impact it had on people who were in relationships. I mean, I think I did ask a question about how often, and I think the average answer was very infrequent, for people who are
Yes.
suffering with long COVID. So if that's you, then you're not alone. That's one thing
And
I'd
I
say.
remember when I did the Gupta program, I mean, they addressed that aspect of life and they were pretty clear, like, again, the goal is to calm the nervous system fundamentally. So they weren't saying sex is off the menu, but they were saying mindful sex, calm sex. And depending on, what people's realities were before, it can be quite a shift. So
Yeah.
empathy.
So Tantra, I think maybe that's the conclusion to this section, is that Tantra is the way forward. Um,
Sounds so bad.
yeah, yeah. So education. This is, I think there's a few different ways of taking this. I think there's personal education, and then there's others, and then there's the relationship between the two. And for me, I think there is, if you've been around this space for a long time, then it gets a bit tiring trying to stay up to speed with it all. And there's times when, and I'm aware in my position, it's important for me to stay on top of the latest research, but I'm aware of my emotional reaction to it, which is, oh God, not more of this, right? And not another paper to read. But all of this research is fantastic and wonderful, and we need it all. But I've got sort of education fatigue on this front to some degree. And I think
Yes.
all of us will have that to some point. And I guess the question is, how important is it for us to stay educated on this subject? I think that's a choice we all have to make individually. And I think as it comes to the education of others, the one thing I wanted to say here was about how many of us feel a need or a responsibility to educate those around us about the condition. If they demonstrate a lack of knowledge about it, is it our responsibility to educate them or not? And again, I don't think there's a straight answer on this. I think it depends on whether that person is interested in knowing more or not. Most of the time, they probably aren't. And that's something else that's very difficult to deal with.
Mhm.
But we are in a different place now, 5 years in, than we were 5 years ago, in terms of there are things to learn about this condition now. If you're coming to it fresh, you could go down a black hole of research for days and come out much wiser. But I don't know. It's a tough one. Where do you come out on this?
I definitely, for the first 3 years, was really following, every one of your YouTubes and at times, downloading a journal article and taking it to my doctors. And I have definitely eased off. My partner, for example, never wanted to like read the long COVID handbook or something, but there have been a few times where I felt maybe even a bit defensively, like you do need to understand a few pathological basics here. Like, I'm not just bitching and moaning. Again, not to belabor this one, but like, here's what's happening and here's what we understand about, the mitochondria and etc. So I think there's a few times with important people where I'm going to go into bad. um, but I do feel like I know more than my GP, which, and that's interesting. But thankfully, the one I have now is receptive. So if I ever felt like, even this is actually a great example. I got COVID, I got reinfected earlier this year. You recommended metformin. You recommended 2 journal articles. I shared those with my doctor. He actually read them. It's a good news story. He read them. He was happy to prescribe the medication, even though this was new to him. He even went so far as to call the pharmacist, give an explanation because he thought they might not know. So, like, it is cool when you see a positive ripple. So, those would be my recent examples, but I'm not mainlining anymore.
Um, Agency control. Yeah, I mean, I could speak about this for hours, or I could just say we've got very little control and we've got very little agency when we're suffering with long COVID. All of the things you used to be able to do, you can't. Your choices are limited, and they all have far greater consequences than they used to, or risk of consequences than they used to. Trivial things have potentially huge risks of consequences. And again, this is where it gets hard and where you sometimes need to educate people around you who may have expectations of you that they don't realize what the consequences of that expectation might be. Um, Hard. I don't know how you feel about agency and control.
Mostly, I think at this point, I mostly accept the glass box I've gotten to know, and I'm grateful, honestly, for as much resumption, a little more space than those first 2 years. I really am. So mostly, I noticed like there's just not as much active grief, like the old me that could do pull-ups and high intensity and all that stuff. Like I actually choose not to focus on it that much. Like, and it's poignant when occasionally it does come to mind and to wonder how different my life might be had this not been my path. But I would say part of my own sense of agency and control is like where I protect my focus and my attention. And so it's almost like I don't give that much attention. But like I said, it comes and goes. If I get tossed in the washing machine badly for a few weeks, that sense of agency feels a little more diminished than my usual baseline I take for granted now. Um, but there was one more thing I was going to say. I think, the conditions of each of our lives make a difference as well. And I hope this is an okay segue. We were talking about like, what are our choices around risk of reinfection, agency to get vaccinated or not? So I'm happy to just be transparent about what I've landed on. Because I have young kids, I made them keep those goddamn masks on. Like, and I'm a pro mask person, but I mean, my poor kids, like, they might have been the last kids in their class. You know what I mean? Keeping masks on for a very long time. And I kept them out of school an extra year than I had to. I mean, I was really cautious for quite some time. But I feel eventually like I want them to have a joyful, liberated life. My youngest son had shown some indicators of a little bit of very mild, but a little bit of long COVID, like baby little flares. I could tell, even though he knew nothing of my symptoms, it was sort of fascinating. Some neuropathology, some little palpitations. I didn't say anything, and thankfully it all settled out. So he could have a bit of vulnerability, is all I'm trying to say. And anyway, I could go down the rabbit hole. In his second infection, he had a really bad, like an OCD manifestation and some inflammation, and it took a few months to settle out. I just named that because I actually think, again, kids with long COVID do not get enough um, acknowledgement. So anyway, I'll just take us on that rabbit hole. But the point is, in the end, I've moved to a degree of surrender and a tolerance for reinfection, which means I think I've had it 4 times because I'm not willing to ask my kids to sort of really pull in, I don't know, their freedom at this point. I still choose to put on a mask. Like if I go to a concert or a play, I do go out to some cultural events. I just feel a little more comfortable to put my mask on. Grocery stores, I've let it go. But I sort of find my own middle ground. But I think having kids has made a big difference. And in some ways, I'm glad for it because I was pretty cautious and restrictive for the first few years. And again, complete respect to the decisions that everyone makes. It's very personal. But I just thought I'd share my snapshot. How about you with that aspect of agency and choice?
It's a tough one, isn't it? I've definitely become, I sort of keep an eye. It's fairly difficult to know about what the COVID instance is around at any given time. But generally, you can look up the hospitalizations at any point, and that is data that's available. And you can see whether we're in a wave or not, because because when we're in a wave, the hospitalizations with COVID will go up. It's basically one of the only tracking things we've got. Go on.
And wastewater tracking. I don't know if
Yeah,
they're still doing it where you are, but I find that interesting as a
yeah,
metric. Okay,
yeah.
but keep going on your choices.
So right now, UK and US, we are pretty flatline. There's a basic level of COVID around there, but it's not everywhere. So at a time like now, I will go into a shop. I do my shopping online because I hate supermarkets. But if I've got to go into a shop, I won't wear a mask. That's fine. I generally won't wear a mask at the moment unless I'm in a very busy indoor space. So if I'm going to the cinema, yeah, I'll wear a mask. If I've got to go through a train station or something like that, I'll wear a mask. But if I'm just around a relatively limited number of people and none of them appear to be ill, I probably won't wear a mask. If there's some fucker who's sneezing or coughing or got a red nose, my mask is on faster than that. Especially if I can't get away from it. If I'm on a train or something and I'm like, okay, here we go, and I'm out of there. If it's a cold, I don't want it. Whatever it is, I don't want it. You know, so that's kind of where I'm at.
Now, one other thing I'll just piggyback on that. There's no question. I appreciate public health etiquette 100% in a way that I didn't before. I think I was fairly relaxed actually about colds, flus, and I'm with you. It really bugs me if people aren't respectfully transparent. Like, hey, just so you know, we're going to a small family dinner or something. I do have a sore throat and a stuffy nose. Are you comfortable? Are you not? I just appreciate the transparency so that I can make an informed choice. And I actually think that's a positive about COVID. I hope people are just a little more respectful about infectious disease. My partner's Japanese Canadian. When we traveled to Japan, they already so much more collectivism, so much more respect for putting on a mask and not wanting to get others ill. So, little rant, I'll pause. But I think it's good if we're more respectful of one another around infectious disease.
Not, yeah. Unfortunately, I think we've been polarized, haven't we? So some people have got more like that. Some people have got much less like that. But that's unfortunately one of the sad things about the world. All right. Finally, on our list, there was a couple of questions. I'll let you read them, Nicola. You got them?
For you?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so Jess, um, just because a few people, we were really honored to read the chat and kind of glean. So a question people had for you is what have you tried, and maybe especially recently, and what is your latest health update?
Okay, so, well, funny you should ask, Nicola, because I'm going to do a whole video talking about that. Latest health update is generally better, but I'm going out to fast again next week. So I'm going to be out there for 3 weeks again, and I'm really hoping that this time again makes another step forwards. But in terms of what have I tried, I'm going to be going through, I've made a list of every single medication, supplement, practice, like mind body stuff that I've tried in the last 5 years, and it might be two, might be three films. And I'm going to go through it and talk about what worked, what didn't, what's my take on it now, what my independent observation is on it, apart from my own experience as well. So I'm going to try and do a breakdown of everything in there. So if anybody's watching this and thinks, "Oh, have you tried this?" just chuck it in the comments because I'll make sure I talk about it.
That's awesome. And that sort of dovetails because the other question was like beyond your own personal experience, evolution, healing, and where you are now. I think some people were also saying, what's the big picture? Like now that we've had 5 years, what do we understand more broadly about some of the best practices or best interventions? So I'll be curious if you're able to expand a little bit on your own personal experience and, just share if there's sort of anecdotal evidence or a little more research coming in. So I'm excited to hear what you understand right now.
That's going to need to be another video, and thank you for making me think of it. because
Sure.
that does need to be made. We need a 5 year assessment on, okay, what's the big picture right now? How do we phenotype people, and how do we say what's best practice for each of those? And again, this isn't necessarily generalized acceptance yet. This would
Yeah.
be my take on it for what that's worth.
Yes. And Jez, you can clip this out if it's not valuable, but I'll have to say just from my own experience, like I'm curious if we understand things like, okay, dysautonomia. I know that's just one of the many phenotypes, but with the dysautonomia, for example, are we at the point where we understand like it really does seem like there's still, viral debris or even active virus, and so it's still active? Or we just got some nervous system damage that some of it is permanent and or there's still room for things like polyvagal therapies and calming practices. Like I'm genuinely curious to, even with those grounds of, is there still room to keep hoping? I can't wait to hear you get into this stuff.
Well, the TLDR on that would be some of all of the above. I think all of the above can be true. And it's a
Yeah.
very heterogeneous group of people. And I think of that, is do a pie chart. And that's kind of where we'll be with all of that stuff. And the pie chart with overlapping segments.
Yeah.
That's
You're
that's
like,
the
the answer,
TLDR on it.
you're like, the answer is yes.
Yeah,
All of the above, mix and match, as with
yeah,
so much of this.
yeah,
Okay, Jez.
yeah.
Well, thanks to the community for giving us food for thought to keep going. And thank you for this opportunity for another chat.
Yeah, it's been fun. And look, if more stuff comes in the comments on this, maybe we run to part four. Who knows? Maybe this goes on forever.
Just keep it going. We're
Yeah.
open. But, or maybe we do it and hopefully, we'll see what happens. Even if we're much, much better. I mean, let's celebrate if in 3 years, where are we now?
Yeah.
So be
Yeah.
continued.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, take care, Jess.